What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to the Absolute Auction Podcast. I'm your host, Ryan Miner. Joining with me is my good pal, Mark Shu. Mark, what's going on, bud?
Not much. Excited to break down our tiers and how to deploy them on the wide receiver positions in our auction drafts tonight.
That's right. Tonight we'll be talking wide receiver tiers, how we build our tiers for it, and then how we execute our strategy for that. That's going to be the main topic tonight. It's going to be a quick and easy show, actually, to be honest with you guys. So, not a long listen. So, we'll just jump right into it right off the bat. So, looking at it, Mark, when you look at your tiers, like, okay, Jamar Chase, Justin Jefferson, CeeDee Lamb, that's easily to say, like, you can say that as a tier. But knowing how you like to draft with tiers and how I like to draft with tiers are two totally different aspects, basically similar to probably like how our wide receiver ones are. You go with your platinum tiers. I go based on auction values when I look at dollar amounts, saying like, yeah, I'm willing to spend that much. I'm not willing to spend that much. When it comes to you building your tiers, like how do you build your tiers right off the bat? Like, is it top five? Is it top 10?
All
How's your
right.
platinum tier start?
So really for this year, and I think usually it used to be smaller, but I've kind of come again to the agreement with myself that you need a little bit more of a range of outcome even in your high end tiers. I know we all think we're so correct about what's how the fallout in the top end of the fantasy performance will shake out. We're never right. But and that's fine. Like it's no big deal. But I do think that if I put myself in that idea of like I'm just putting those players in that box of can they make the top four? Can they make that platinum tier? For me, I have 8 players right now that I think could fill that top four. And so they populate my top 8. There's still going to be, obviously there's a contradiction. There can't be 8 players in the top four. But all I'm saying is like these are all the players that I really think most realistically are going to populate that top four, and then I move my way down. So that ends up being Jamar Chase, Justin Jefferson, CeeDee Lamb, Nico Puka, Brian Thomas Jr., Malik Neighbors, and Amon-Ra St. Brown. I don't think that's really that unreasonable to say most of those guys can be in the top four, most likely this year. Obviously, I can be a little more bold takey about it, but I don't. I think that ends up just making us a little more willing to overpay for players when really there might be other guys that are just as well a little further back. So I like them in my top 8. Then I kind of, as far as tiers go, when we were doing quarterbacks, we were talking about the top 8 and then the next tier, the gold tier, which is top 16. There are a lot more wide receivers. You're going to have to dip into that silver tier, which is more like a top 30 player, and then the bronze tier, which is more like top 48. You have to have all those possibilities for where those players lie because you're obviously going to be picking past those numbers and it's going really deep in a dynasty auction. So you really need to know who's in those tiers and when they start to dry up because again, the more like as you auction, it's how much money you have, when you need to sort of take a break because you've just spent a good amount of money. All of that kind of factors in, and you kind of have to be able to time it based on how many players are left in a tier before you can kind of make your way back in and try and sneak a few guys in as the tier hits and you maybe get some money back.
Yeah, no, I exactly feel the same way you do. Like I have the top tier, and then I have like the next set of tiers. Like I actually have like you have the gold, silver, bronze tiers. I'm more like tier one, tier two, tier three. I try to separate it like that. Like I can kind of put them in the same tier. But I guess if you wanted to put it, I could do platinum, gold, silver, bronze. But yeah, my bronze would be definitely very deep. Probably like you said, 40, 50 players. But
Right.
like,
Go
go
ahead. Sorry.
ahead.
No, I'm just saying. My platinum tier is 8. My platinum
Yeah.
tier is 8, and every tier after that gets much wider. My next one goes to 23, and then my silver tier, which is all my top 30 candidates, goes to 46. It's so there's still a lot. There's a wide gap that I put for mine. It doesn't sound great to think about like when you're trying to price something and saying, okay, that's a lot of players in one tier. How are we going to price them all that they're all similar? I actually think it kind of makes it a little bit easier. It kind of tells you like how much money is in the room and how much you need to be able to be willing to spend on all these players. But also I think, it still gives you that idea of saying, okay, I have my tiers. These are their values as far as like player production, and then you still can have them ranked and you can still price them by your ranks. There's nothing wrong with that. But it just gives you a better idea again of like what's the story of the draft going down right now? What tiers are drying up? What tiers are available at the price range? When I have money, what are the best players for me to be going after?
Yeah, and that will kick us off to like executing the draft strategy on that one. So you have your tiers, you're executing the draft strategy, and you notice a lot of people want to go young. Like, everyone thinks they know the best guy to get right now. Like an easy one to say, Brian Thomas Jr., year number two. Is Marvin Harrison Jr. going to bounce back this season? Is Ladd McConkey going to take the next step forward? Can Rome Odunze actually do something if Keenan Allen actually moves on? These are young players that are going to be very high in your tiers. But don't forget those veterans when you're executing those drafts, because those veterans can sometimes be a huge benefit to you and actually help you win your fantasy football league. So like when I have my tiers, like, yeah, I have the tiers, but I actually put a dollar amount towards my guy. So I actually have the dollar amounts on mine. I'm willing to pay this much for my wide receiver one. Let's say, CeeDee Lamb. Wide receiver two, I'll drop down to T. Higgins. $16, we'll say somewhere around that range. Wide receiver three, that's where I'm starting to get more risky with it. I'll say 10 to 12 ish range. So if I could find someone like a Devontae Adams who, just signed with the Rams, a veteran status point, because then I could try to follow it back with, say, someone like an Xavier Worthy to kind of build depth because of, issues that these guys have red flags. Sometimes I tend to go after the red flag guys, but never be afraid to buy veterans. That's one of my biggest things I like to say when it comes to executing your draft. Buy some veterans, because in the long run, those could be phenomenal trade pieces for you or league winners for you.
I agree. And honestly, we've talked about this before. When you're doing dynasty auction drafts, like any dynasty draft, it doesn't even have to be an auction. Younger players are going to come at a premium, and even if they're not necessarily proven, first round picks are still going to go, in the early parts of your startup draft, whether you like it or not. Players there are going to be teams that want youth that are going to prioritize the future over right now. And so I often think that veterans are overlooked, and you can usually get them for a really good price. So yeah, it's a really good way to come off of having to spend up for certain parts of the position. Like so I have those eight platinum tier members, and that basically I would love to have one of those be my wide receiver one. I really try my best to get one of them if I can. And as far as like receivers go, after I get into the gold tier, I start to become a little more agnostic about every player and kind of see them a little more as all the same in certain respects. So I can sort of, as I get into that top 30 conversation, I start to lose interest in players values as much as I am interested in their dollar value that they're coming for. So I usually, when I'm sort of putting my wide receiver team together in an auction startup, it's going to be securing one of those top 8 wide receivers, usually, as long as the prices are not astronomical, and then trying to find really like guys like Devontae Adams. We talked about this just in our last episode. He this year ends up in my gold tier, just because of where he is with the Rams, and having confidence in Matthew Stafford being his quarterback. I feel good about him having the potential for a top 15 season if everything breaks right. And he's a gold tier redraft player for me. In Dynasty, that still probably puts him in my silver tier, but he's probably closer to the top than people think. And because he's a veteran, he's likely to not see nearly the price or dollar value on him that some other guys who, like even Marvin Harrison Jr. Marvin Harrison Jr. is going to be going in Dynasty before Devontae Adams, most likely, in your drafts, and he's probably going to go for more money. And I still feel like, Marvin Harrison still can have a great career. But if you're competing to win now, I don't mind taking the dollar dollar or the taking the savings on Devonte Adams over a guy like Marvin Harrison if he's like my 2 or my 3.
No, exactly. Like sometimes you can start your dynasty draft off like a redraft. We just had Adam out the last episode. Adam does redraft auctions all the time. And like looking at that, like if he saw the values of those, yes, you have 32 rounds compared to 16 that we do in redraft. You could still get a really good value on all these wide receivers. And with you saying like how Devontae Adams is in your gold tier, Devontae Adams, I'm looking at Fantasy Pros to use as a reference. They have him down at wide receiver 44. That just goes to show you what their tiers are and what they think, and compared to what your tiers are, Mark, and what you think are two totally different things, because there is nothing wrong with how you build your tiers, because your hypothesis is this is what I think they could do based on beat going to that team. I think we're here on Fantasy Pros. I think they're using the age factor a lot, being age 32 compared to these younger guys. Like Ted McMillan hasn't had even made a team, hasn't been drafted yet, and they already have him at wide receiver 18. Go ahead and buy him. I will go ahead and pass on him because I've never seen this guy play it down. Take him all you want.
Right. And I think as far as like a guy like these wide receivers that are aging and still have value, production value, like often you can get them for second round picks or less, right? Like Devonte Adams, with his landing spot, he'll probably people will ask for a second still at this time of year. I'm not surprised by that. Don't necessarily need to pay it now. Maybe you could pay it a little closer to the beginning of the season or something like that. But that's not really the point. Think about in your dynasty leagues out there, how many times you're looking to trade a pick and how easy it is to give up a second. Like give up a second round pick. There are so many times where in my mind I'll say like, oh, I'll get this back some other time. I'll get this second round pick back some other time. Well, all the while you could just have Devonte Adams, who's still in his redraft, like he's still working well in redraft to be a producing wide receiver. So why are you so worried about having that extra second? I get thinking down the road, but if you're competing, why have that second on your team? An asset that in your mind you probably can think I can get a second any day of the week at some if I really want it. Why not have Devonte Adams on your roster?
Yeah, exactly. Like it's like if you need the second that bad, let's say you have Calvin Ridley on your team, he's still projected to be a good wide receiver. You could still probably trade him for a second, maybe be a back in a second, but still a second. Or even say like someone like Juwan Jennings, I can see him going for a second round pick easily. So you can always flip and flop no matter what you do. And what's nice about these drafts is you want to get that wide receiver depth, and you just keep adding to it. Like I don't care whatever I'm starting. It's usually I'll look at the wide receivers and I'll look at the flex spots. I try to at least double that at least on my bench very easily, at least double, because that's the position that's going to last longest next to quarterback. Well, Mark, you got anything else?
Not really. Always good as far as, when we get down to the back end, like to the very bottom, I always think it's, always good to just keep throwing darts on wide receivers that are young. Actually, you still need to find some guys in the back end, right? Like there are plenty of receivers out past, ADP as wide receiver 50 and 60 that you can still like right now. I mean, like on things like Underdog, I think Hollywood Brown is still in the late 60s, which is fine. Like those little players can be role players here and there, and can because of the nature of wide receiver, if one player goes down, usually you can find someone that pops up and gains a little value for the year. If you lose, that sometimes those young players that maybe didn't break out the first year or even the second year, they get forgotten about. I always like to use those players and kind of fill the back end of my bench, because really I don't think I'm going to use a lot of these receivers in the long run, but they do have some of that upside that you can go for. It really kind of, you want to look for anyone that has some decent production, that are moving in the right direction. And then Yeah, I mean that's really about it. I think we covered it pretty well.
Yeah, you're looking at like when you're saying like Marquise Brown, you're looking at like dollar or $2 players at that point. So you're so far
Right.
down the draft board, it's a lot easier. Those are your dart throws. You're looking at a little bit of veteran presence and maybe a guy who's coming off an injury because you can always get him super cheap too at that point.
Right.
All right, man. That was a good episode today.
Yeah.
All
Got
right,
two
bro.
got two out in a pretty short time, so that's good.
That's right. This one will come out probably Wednesday, I'm guessing, before we do our Thursday recording. So
I like it.
good up. Yeah, me too, man. This was a lot of fun. We'll catch you guys next time.
See ya.